welcome to the Orchid Hut. My name is Dana, and today we are going to be doing a quick repot of my Dendrobium green lantern. This Dendrobium was in a video I did yesterday about paying careful attention to what's going on with your orchids, because clearly this one has, at least in the past, had some sort of issue. I'm also not crazy about the sphagnum moss that it was potted in. It was very, very wet for a number of days until it dried out, and I think this might have just been a result of being too wet and lack of air circulation in the way that the orchid was packaged at my local garden center. So we're gonna go ahead and get this out of the sphagnum moss. Quick repot. You may hear chainsaws and limbs falling in the background. We're having our gigantic oak trees trimmed today, in addition to the gigantic neighbor's oak trees that overhang our yard. So you may hear some noise like that, but the orchid care must go on despite the chainsaws and the falling limbs. Okay, so in the bottom of this pot were just some cubes of styrofoam, I guess just to take up space. Okay, but all of this moss is coming off. And you know, even though I have let this dry out for a number of days, this moss is still damp. It's not, you know, in particularly bad shape, as in old, but I just can't grow things like this in complete sphagnum moss. The humidity here is just too high most of the year, and it just takes far too long for this to dry out, not to mention the fact that it's generally really tight around these roots, and that does not allow for the air circulation that the roots actually need. So as I'm pulling this out, you know, the roots aren't looking too bad considering. I had feared the worst when I saw what was happening to the leaves, but that just might have been an acute situation that those two particular leaves didn't like. Maybe there was some sun damage. We never know. We can just often hope that, you know, if we decide to treat it, or if we don't decide to treat it, that, you know, it's just not a spreading situation. Okay, so this is, you know, coming out relatively easily. There are a few dead roots to trim, but it's not bad. Chainsaws and limbs falling. Every time one hits the roof, it makes me jump just a little bit. Although I trust these guys. They're the only ones that have trimmed our oak trees for the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. They always do a great job. They always clean up. And I think they're very careful not to intentionally damage anything. They're one of the few tree companies that actually climb up into the trees to cut the limbs properly. A lot of tree service people will only trim from, you know, standing on the ground and like looking up and cutting off what they can reach, and that leads to an unnatural shape of your tree. And these guys are always very conscious of, you know, allowing the tree to maintain its natural shape even though they've trimmed it. Okay, so that root system is actually looking pretty good. I am going to go rinse it off, let it dry, spray it with 3% hydrogen peroxide, and let that dry for the most part, and then I'll be back with the repot. Okay, so back with part 2 here, repotting this Dendrobium. Chainsaws are still going, except now it's in the front of the yard instead of the back. Okay, so root system, pretty good shape here. These cutters have already been sterilized. There's not really a lot to do here, you know, maybe a few roots here and there, but it's not any kind of unexpected root loss, so that's good. I am a little bit curious. There are some roots that have almost like a turquoise color on them, and I do not know how that got that way, except that where that is, it is dead. So I'm going to be cutting off anything that has like that turquoise color, because right there at that mark, the root has died. I'm wondering if that was like from a over-fertilization or something, and a piece of blue fertilizer sat right there too long. I don't know, I think that is the first time I've seen anything turquoise colored on the roots of an orchid. There's a few threads, you know, in the middle of this. I'm not going to bother to cut all that off. I'm really just looking for anything that looks completely mushy or dead. Ah, here's another turquoise one. If anybody knows what that's from, leave me a comment. There's one turquoise spot in there. I'm not gonna cut that root off. It doesn't seem to be dead like the others. Oops, loud noise, limbs falling. Okay, maybe this one. As long as one of the tree trimmers doesn't fall, it's good. Okay, now inside the pot is a little bit of cork, and I'll put a little bit of the Dendrobium orchid mix on top of that. And I'm not, you know, putting this in a big pot. That could be really bad, because then it would be staying too moist in there, almost as bad as what the sphagnum moss was. So I'll put a little bit in and then give it a tap so that the smaller pieces can work their way in between the roots. You also want to always check the sides of the pot to make sure that there aren't any super large air gaps in there. With a Phalaenopsis, it's not quite as, I guess, bad if you have like a larger air pocket, but because the roots of a Dendrobium are not as substantial as the roots of a Phalaenopsis, you do want to make sure that the air pockets are not super large. Okay. Now, I have learned to always have more media close by, because what I plan for always seems to be a little short. pressing only enough to stabilize it. And I'll give it a good watering. These roots, you know, have had a lot of wetness recently, but I think it's important to get the media wet. It sometimes takes a little while for the media to be able to hang on to the moisture, so I may as well go ahead and start that process now. Okay. Always make sure the tag gets back. Dendrobium green lantern. I'm hoping that those 2 leaves eventually just fall off and there's nothing else wrong with the remainder of the plant. Okay, please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed watching it. The subscribe button will be in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Thanks so much for watching, and look for me on Facebook and Instagram if you would like to follow along there. Talk with you next time.